Reusable doesn't mean risky, sanitized doesn't mean subpar, and ISO standards are far from optional. But despite the evidence, we still encounter common misconceptions around reusable sharps containment, from doubts about cleanliness to assumptions that risk assessments can override compliance. So it's time to really set that record straight, clarify what's fact, what's fiction, and what responsible practice really looks like. So, if some believe that because safer sharps devices are mandated, container standards are less relevant, is that true?
Absolutely not. What you're talking about here is the health and safety, well, actually not guidance, law around using safer sharps devices to eliminate needle stick injuries or minimize needle stick injuries. That was mandatory, came in 2013. I think the study that we talk about earlier from the Royal College of Nursing actually stated that 15% of nurses get sharps injuries, not necessarily needle stick injuries, every year. And I think it was 32% of those are disposal related. So basically, that's 1 in 6, 1 in 6.5 nurses get a needle stick injury every year. I think it's absolutely unacceptable. The design of the syringes, obviously an incredible opportunity for health and safety to bring in this standard. And there was also a standard in the US as well for safer sharps. That's protecting the nurse during the delivery of the drugs or the blood taking. And it's just sort of saying, right, okay, let's make sure when you're giving an injection to a patient and you're taking that away and you put it before you put it in the sharps container that you're safe. But these things are not designed for transport. You know, they're designed to go inside a sharps container. We do actually see we do regular sharps audits. Myself personally will look into sharps containers, and we see still see a number of syringes that don't have a safety device. Some of them are recapped, some of them aren't. Some of the devices aren't activated. But there's a vast amount of devices that are disposed of into sharps containers that aren't necessarily syringes with safety devices. There's vials, there's ampules, there's single-use devices, there's things like guide wires, there's other instruments, single-use instruments in operating theatres. So to actually say we have a safe system now, so we don't need a sharps container is actually very dangerous, actually, to say that. And obviously you still need to make sure that you have security as well. There's pharmaceuticals in there. You need to make sure that those containers are robust and safe right down to the point of disposal. To me, I know route to net zero CO2 emissions is huge, and I think it's an incredible initiative that we've got, and we're working with hospitals to actually achieve that. But I think we also should be looking at the route to zero sharps injuries for nurses and downstream workers. I think it's that important. Safety sharps containers should never be compromised, even if there is a sharps safety technology on the syringe.
So, are ISO standards just guidance? Could a hospital simply risk assess their way around them?
Interesting, yes. All ISO standards are guidance, I believe. But I guess what you've got to do is you've got to have some kind of a safety standard. In all my years of working with healthcare or inside healthcare, I don't think there's any medical device or safety device in the hospitals that isn't procured against a specific standard. And the vast majority of those are either British standards in the UK, American standards in the US, and the ISO was meant to try and harmonize those standards and bring all the good from, standards across the world into one. So I would actually challenge, why you would want to do that. I'd also challenge why a supplier of a product like a reusable container would not want to comply with ISO. To me, it's proof of safety. It gives you a rhythm and a routine for compliance yourself. I think the vast majority of companies in the UK that will manufacture against an ISO quality standard. They'll have an ISO sustainability standard. They'll have an ISO health and safety standard. So I would just actually challenge why you would want to procure a less expensive, and I think that I'll being honest, can be the only reason that you would want to buy something that doesn't comply with an ISO standard. But then the other thing I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Josh, there's a number of frameworks out there for procuring of Sharps containers, and I think everyone that I know of actually mentions the ISO 23907 Part 2. I know some reusable manufacturers across the world have actually said, oh, we do our testing to ISO 23907 Part 1. Well, that's good for the first use, but it ain't good for the 500th, 600th use if you're claiming that amount of uses. And what you want to make sure of is that you're getting a container that has got a validated cleaning process. So from an infection control standpoint, I think when I first got involved in the reusable Sharps containers in 2006, there was the biggest barrier, understandably, was from infection control, saying, why would I have a Sharps container that contains potentially infected blood and potentially dangerous drugs actually coming back into an aseptic environment like an operating theatre, pharmaceutical manufacturing suite, or indeed a ward? Why would I do that? And basically, the goal for us in those days was to prove that this process was no risk. We washed those containers to a standard that was, and tested them to a standard that was, in some situations higher than the surfaces that you would see in an operating theatre. So I would really question why you would even want to go down the route of a non-ISO. The burden of risk actually now passes to the hospital. So you should validate that container's clean. You should validate that it's gone through its life cycle simulation tests. It's been dropped in every orientation. So why wouldn't you let the manufacturer do that? Take the risk, accredit that in an independent lab. Why would you want to do it yourself? Yeah.
What's one of the biggest misconceptions you hear around Sharps container safety?
Misconceptions related to the reusable, I would say, the cleanliness of the container. They'll sort of say, why, again, going back to my previous point, why would I use something that's been that's already had blood and syringes and drugs in that container? And just Sharpsmart, the validation that tests that they actually have gone through proves a 6-log reduction. So basically, that if you had it's been challenged, if you had 1 million microorganisms, you after the washing process, you will have less than 1, which is a really, really high standard. It's repeatable. It's validatable. So I think that part of it is incredibly important, but is something that's been achieved. Yeah, I think that's the biggest misconception. There are a couple of others that we can risk assess. You can risk assess a container, but you need to risk assess that container for everything that is in ISO. Every single part of that standard should be risk assessed by the hospital. And I guess the other one as well is around the assembly. We want a container that nests, for example. We see that ISO 23907 Part 2 actually dictates that you will test that container in its assembled condition. So now, if you do that, you've got to do that. If you don't have a pre-assembled container, you have to make sure that you are assembling that to the standard and doing those quality tests that you would do. Interestingly, going back to the cleanliness side of it, we actually did some swabbing some years ago of single-use containers that had gone from the manufacturing site to the distribution center to the distribution center of the supplier to NHS supply chain, then from supply chain into the ward, from the ward to the department. And in some situations, those containers have been touched 6 times, and obviously 6 times, not necessarily with gloves and with the hand. So whereas a reusable container, what happens is it comes off the back of the washing machine. It's inspected by the QA team and it's put straight into a transporter. And the next time that is touched is when it gets to that hospital site. So, and we actually do, Sharpsmart do ATP swabbing very regularly. Now, there's parametric release on the washing machine. There's a validated process for ISO on the washing machine. But what Sharpsmart have undertaken is to do ATP swabbing, which is actually what some hospitals use to test surfaces, and the surface of that container is always a better cleaning quality than is accepted in a surface in wards and operating theatres in hospitals. So that misconception about cleaning, I think, is something that's definitely been addressed over the years.
So what can busting these myths and other myths like it do for healthcare worker safety?
Well, it's simple regarding safety. I mean, obviously, ISO means, to me, ISO means safety. The fact that you've gone through those. So that's what it means to healthcare workers. And like I said, the housekeepers, the porters, and the downstream workers in the medical waste facilities. It means safety. Anything less than that, I would just say that should not be considered. I'm really, clear and passionate about that. But what we haven't talked about in relation to reusable containers is that whole sustainability piece. The container itself, a single-use container, represents 33% of the waste that is normally incinerated related to a sharps bin. So the bin itself is 33% of the sharps waste that is incinerated. So obviously that's a huge consideration. There was a British Medical Journal study of 40 NHS trusts that actually proved that introducing reusable sharps containers would actually represent a comparative life cycle reduction of over 80% when you compared that with single-use containers. So the route to net zero is all about exactly that route to net zero, eliminating single-use plastic. So that's one of the inherent benefits of reusables. We're all supposed to be eliminating single-use plastic, so why wouldn't you consider that reusable sharps container?